Ladies and gentlemen, special day for Dallas chess scene, and I would say Texas chess scene, US chess scene, and entire world's chess scene. 13-year-old Dallas native Andy Woodward becomes youngest grandmaster in the world. I had the pleasure of working with Andy when he was young. It's actually crazy to say young at 13 years old, but at age of 10, 11 probably. And I gotta say, from the day one, I did not have a slightest doubt that Andy was gonna make it. Obviously, I'm very happy and proud it happened this fast, and I look forward to seeing what is next. All right, Andy, congrats. And anything under 2700 will not be accepted. All right. Andy Woodward becomes the youngest grandmaster in the world at 13 years old, 8 months and 28 days. Andy earns his last norm to become the youngest grandmaster in the world and 10th youngest in the history of chess. What an accomplishment. And what a way to earn the final grandmaster norm. All right. So there was a closed invitational tournament that took place in Saudi Arabia. This was the tournament, Jeddah, excuse me if I'm mispronouncing that, International Chess Festival, Young Masters. As you can see, there were a lot of strong players here, a lot of young blood, and people that, or players that shape the chess world and the next generation of the chess world, I would say. Among them, Pranav, who is Magnus's buddy for now, Raunak Sedwani, Volodar Murzin, and young Turkish talent, Erdogmus. All right, he's already been making strides, and with this win, I think he earned, I believe, second Grandmaster norm. So there is no doubt that he is also going to be Grandmaster soon enough, before we know it. All right, now let's talk about Andy's performance in this tournament, and what a way to make GM. So amazingly, Andy starts tournament with 2 losses. All right, now I'm not gonna go into those games, all right, because I want to show games that Andy won actually, but it is anyone who has played an actual tournament after 2 losses coming back to score 6 points out of remaining 7 games. That is heroic performance, all right, in that 7 rounds, especially in a field like this. Now let's jump into the games. All right, I will show 2 games. First game I want to show is against Oro Faustino. Now Faustino Oro is also a well-known figure in the chess world. Faustino has been attracting a lot of eyes, being up-and-coming talent. I think he is, I believe, 10 or 11 years old. Let's see the game 1 that I wanna show against Faustino. Clash of 2 young players that will be seen in the chess world for a very long time. I think no one doubts that. Now let's see. Andy starts with d4, knight f6, c4, e6, g3. His favorite Catalan, d5, bishop goes to g2, bishop e7, knight f3. Short castle, knight to c3. Pretty standard way of playing out Catalan. This is the main position. Now short castle immediately is way more popular, but looks like Andy had something specific in mind here with knight to c3. This could be preparation against particular opponent and trying to eliminate one of the lines that they are navigating towards. Now, Faustino plays a5, which has been becoming quite popular against Catalan setups. Black basically tries to expand on the queen side here. Magnus himself used this setup against Wojtaszek at the World Cup few years back, and I believe since then it's been gaining popularity. Now, short castle c6, and Andy goes bishop to f4, developing the bishop. Now, with c6 here, seemingly black wants to take on c4 immediately, but this move bishop f4 basically says that, all right, be my guest. If you take on c4, I believe white's idea was to go knight e5, attack this pawn, trying to gain it. You can't quite play b5 here, because then knight will take on b5, and that pawn is pinned on c6. So Faustino does not touch c4 pawn, instead goes knight b d7, and again, one of the most testing continuations here, knight e5, asking black questions immediately. What are you going to do? How are you going to develop your light squared bishop? If you take on e5, taking back with the pawn, your knight becomes uncomfortable, then taking on d5, and followed with e4. If this is the pawn structure, I think due to space, white should be slightly preferred here. So instead of knight takes e5, Faustino decides to take on c4 right now. Knight takes c4, and then bring knight to d5, attacking that bishop on f4, right? Since white had just moved that bishop there. Now, this game is a very good illustration, also I would say, how white plays out the position in Catalan after giving up the dark square bishop on f4. And that's what happens in the game here. Knight takes f4, g takes f4, knight goes to f6, e3. Now, this is obviously not a new idea. It's pretty standard idea in Catalan to give up this dark square bishop and then strengthen the pressure on the center with g pawn on f4, right? After g pawn comes to f4. Also, king may move on the side and rook will use the g file, but main advantage of white's position is still space and the uncomfortable placement of that light squared bishop. And not only placement, but does not have a good purpose. This pawn is stuck inside the pawn chain and will have a very difficult time getting out. Now we'll see how Andy builds the game here on all those elements. Knight to d5, now knight e5, and brings that knight back to d3. All right, now black will have to continue development or trying to develop that bishop somehow. So black plays bishop d7, I believe, with the idea of bishop e8 and rerouting it towards the king side. White plays queen to b3, attacking the b7 pawn at the moment. So black now faces serious questions. How are you going to defend b7 pawn, and what are you going to do about an x-ray along a to g8 diagonal? So black plays b6 to protect that pawn, and here comes f5, taking down defenses on e5 square. All right, now knight on d5 is really vulnerable, so black obviously does not want to allow their knight d5, bishop d5, then a8 rook will also be hanging here. So black plays knight takes c3, rook takes c3, now e6 pawn is hanging, so this queen has to be kicked away from the diagonal, queen returns back, and e takes f5. Now bishop takes c6, bishop takes c6, rook takes c6. Let's evaluate the position now. It looks like that material is equal, and in fact white's king is completely exposed. All right. However, the weakness of light squares makes black's position hopeless. It is pretty amazing to contextualize it that way, but black is way worse. It's over +2 by the engine evaluation. F5 pawn is weak. White has complete control of the C file, and white will have complete control of the light squares. So game continues, bishop d6. Now queen gets on the diagonal, king is kicked away, queen goes to e6, now going for f5 pawn. Now the d6 bishop was hanging, so it has to move away. Rook fc1, and it doesn't take the pawn immediately here, excuse me, because there was a sneaky rook trampoline on the 5th rank. So brings rook to the c file, doubles up. Now if you move that rook, there is a threat of rook c8. So first rook e8, queen takes f5, rook goes to a5, and queen c8 now will force the queen trade. There is one check, but king will just move on the side, and that is about it with checks. Now white forced the queen trade there, because if you move the queen away, then there will be queen takes, e8 takes there, and then rook goes to c8. So black plays bishop takes h2 here, but simply queen d8, rook takes d8, and it doesn't go rook c8 here. Immediately takes this pawn on b6, which is also pretty good. Now if you go rook g1 check, knight on d3 is protecting that rook. So black decides to push the pawn, but after king e2, that h pawn is not going anywhere because of white's piece activity. All right, before that pawn gets till promotion squares, this knight will do a lot of damage here, either e6, e4, or b7. And that's kind of what happens in the game here. The knight is now threatening too many forks. So if you do take it, then this pawn is going to become the problem, the c pawn. So rook g4 was played in the game, but knight b7 is simply a fork. And after rook b8, rook goes to b5, threatening knight d6. Black loses the h5 pawn or a bishop. So obviously black decides to move the bishop away, but that rook h5, winning another pawn, returning back to b5, and with 2 pawns up for white, Faustino realized there was not a lot of hope, so he resigned. All right, I think the game is not quite miniature, but it's a very good illustration of how fast weakness of light squares can take black's game down. And how does white win in general in Catalan, or when allowing knight takes f4 and then g takes f4. Simple and straightforward game. All right, the second game I was gonna go over was played against V. Pranav. V. Pranav is also a young player from India, buddy of Carlsen, as chess world knows him. I think after clutching a few important wins at the European Club Cup and winning that tournament, Magnus tweeted about him. So that was the little pre-context of the story, but undoubtedly a very strong player. So let's see what happened. So game starts with e4, Andy's favorite Sicilian. Here d6, taking on d4, now goes f6 and a6. We have Najdorf on the board. Now Najdorf is probably one of the healthiest Sicilians out there. And Pranav, out of all the moves that's been played against Najdorf, chooses to go for Sozin attack. Sozin attack, favored by Fischer long time ago. I wouldn't say it's the most popular, but it is quite popular. Now Andy decides to respond to it with Scheveningen or Scheveningen type of setup here with e6, a4, and next move was actually quite interesting to me. Bishop to d7. Now a4 is not the most popular move there, but from 309 games, 156 games went bishop e7. Only 2 games continued with bishop d7. All right, so you can already see how rare this is. All right, obviously, I'm sure both players have seen this with different move orders, this setup. Rook goes to c8, queen to e2, because black was threatening here to take on d4, after which the c4 bishop would be hanging. So queen goes to e2 to defend that guy. Now queen c7, renewing that threat, and Pranav decides to move that bishop back to a2. Bishop e7, f4, and short castle. Black finishes development with a little bit of a delay, but since white also was finishing the development and was trying to get this f4 and going queen e2, nothing really major happened in the center at the moment, and now both sides are ready to engage. Computer also approves this is right around 0 zeros. All right, as you can see here on the bar. Now white plays king h1, and here is probably the first decisive trade here. Andy decides to capture on d4 and go with e5. These type of decisions are very comical because there was a trade of a very important piece in the center, followed by change of pawn structure. All right, bishop retreats back, bishop e6. Now this light square bishop has to be neutralized, and also d5 square has to be taken under control here. Bishop b3 and bishop to c4. Now this is where black starts to take over the initiative move by move. Let's see how. Bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, queen moves away, d5. Another powerful strike in the center here. Power play at its best. And this is what the Sicilian is really about. Now, both pawns here are hanging. If you take the d5 pawn, I believe e4 is the case. You move the queen away and then takes on d5. And after trades, black is left with the protected passer after something like f5 here. And any kind of endgame will be in black's favor, basically. Now, after d5 here, white decides to take on e5, which is followed by knight takes e4. So still right around the equal here. If knight takes e4, I think it's clearly visible that black's pawn structure here is better. Computer says that this is probably still the best option, and going something like queen on g5 and giving this up temporarily, because I believe there's gonna be bishop h6 here. But black is gonna play rook c6, bringing the rook on the g file with some fire. All right, so white says no to trades, trade of knights, knight to back to e2, bishop to c5. Now offering the trade of dark square bishops. All right, this is another very instructive moment, I would say. Black first traded the knight for the knight, then traded light squared bishop for the light squared bishop, and next wants to trade dark squared bishop now for the dark squared bishop. All right, a very masterful decision making with trades. All right, huge part of the game. Correct exchanging is huge part of the game. Now bishop to c5, point also being, now if you take there, rook takes c5, c pawn is hanging, and there will be knight d2 threat, wanting to fork queen and the rook and winning an exchange. All right, so bishop c5 was responded with c3, rook to e8, now increasing the pressure on this e5 pawn, b3, queen takes b3. Now why b3? White is already looking for a bailout, pretty much, because e5 pawn is hanging. You can take on c5, or I guess you can, but you're gonna lose the e5 pawn. If you go something like bishop f4 here, defending that pawn, then f6, and you take there, rook takes f6, and entire white's position is collapsing. You can't move the queen away because there will be knight f2. If you don't move the queen away, there are threats of knight d2 and knight g5. So black actually is -5 in this position, which is enormous. All right, so b3, a desperate attempt here to seek for counterplay. Queen takes b3, taking on c5, knight takes back, knight to d4, now attacking the queen, queen back to c4. Basically, this is a conversion phase already. After knight f5, knight to e4, another precise move. If rook takes e5, there's queen g3 attacking the rook and the pawn on g7. So knight goes to e4, rook to b1, rook takes e5. That is pawn number 2. Now queen goes to f4, rook retreats back to e6, and after rook takes b7, rook f6 now pinning this knight. Rook f3, already white is under a minute here on the clock, so this situation should be a nightmare even with the time on the clock. Black is -3 almost. Rook f3, g6, now that knight will be in trouble. Rook b4, because if you move the knight away, then king g7 simply, and let's say you move queen to e5, queen e2, and now there are back rank threats. There is a threat of knight f2. Game is pretty much decided. Rook b4, queen a2, final touches here. White tries to steer up some counterplay, but it is too late. Let's say queen c1 to protect the back rank. Knight f2 check, king moves on the side, and the final touch, knight to d3. Now, computer does say this is a brilliancy, but considering the level of play that was portrayed leading up to this moment, I would say that knight d3 was the most surprising move of the game here, because it simply forks queen and the knight, and if you do take that knight, it will be queen f2 check, and queen f1 is a back rank checkmate. So queen goes to d1 was played, takes on f3, then check, and simply takes on b4, taking an exchange. After cb4, rook to e8, and this knight will also drop, because if you move the knight away, there is rook e1 check and winning a queen. So that was the time where Pranav called it a game. Alright guys, those were games I wanted to show. Again, congratulations to Andy, very well deserved, and I look forward to many more exciting games. And another representative of 2700 Club from Texas soon. Alright, and Andy, hopefully I'm gonna be following your footsteps soon towards making a Grandmaster title. What is life? Following footsteps of one time my student. It's the cycle. We never stop learning. Alright guys, hopefully you enjoyed. Do let me know in the comments what you thought, and I'll see you all in the next one. Cheers.